Imam.
We're good? Okay. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد الأنبياء والمرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين أما بعد. So this entire section is a discussion on riya. Previously we had talked about when we leave actions, how that could fall into riya. And in this discussion we're going to be talking about different aspects of where riya can enter most, how it can be so harmful, and how is it that we avoid it. One of the things that is discussed and one of the things that Imam Ghazali talks about in this chapter is the issue of leadership and basically power positions in general, right? Not specifically leadership, because he talks about leadership, he talks about judging, he talks about giving fatwa, he talks about teaching, right? So he talks about all of these different positions and these different power dynamics, and when an individual should step forward and when he should step back. What's interesting about leadership is that any position of power, the Sharia always deals with it as like a double-edged sword, meaning that if an individual, if he is a ruler and he rules justly, or if he judges and he judges justly, or if he is wealthy and he gives wealth in a just and a meaningful manner, then what happens with that person? Is it a regular reward or is it an immense one? Right? It's an immense reward. It's very different than just being a worshiper. But at the same token, if you have a judge who is unjust, or if you have a leader who is unjust, how bad is their punishment? Is it just a regular punishment, or is it a very bad punishment? Right? It's very tormentful. It's a very bad punishment. Even when the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he talked about the scholar, he talked about the qari, he talked about the mujahid, right? These are all choices that we make as individuals, and when we get into positions that have very high risk, right? That high risk can be in either direction. Either I can be immensely rewarded and I can reach the top levels of paradise, or I can be thrown into the lowest levels of the hellfire. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from that. So in order to kind of balance that, Imam Ghazali, he mentions here that if worldly temptation is not the problem, it's not the issue, and there are a few ways to get there. What are some ways if that an individual knows that they are immune to the world? So if I see a vacuum and I see a position that open for leadership, how do I know that, right, there's no guarantee, but I'm saying, what will give me a good idea if I'm able to handle that leadership or not? What are some things I should look for in myself?
The criteria of what that leadership requires.
Okay, sure. See if I'm qualified, right? That's number one, for sure. What else? Okay, right. If it's not just me seeing that, hey, I think I could do a good job here, there are other people who are actually saying like, hey, no, we think you'll be successful and you'll be able to manage this well. What else? Is that good enough? If I have qualifications and I have others saying that I can do it? How do I know I won't be tested with the money?
Can you elaborate what you meant?
Sure. So if I run for a leadership position and the president, for example. So the president's salary isn't outrageous, but do you guys have any idea what the president's salary is?
300K.
Huh? Yeah, it's a little more than that. It's around like $400,000. $400,000, it's a good amount of money. How do I know that that money won't test me once I get into that position? I don't. Are there any indicators I can look for? Past temptation, like, right? So if you have somebody, who is wealthy and they're running for the president's position, what are the chances that that wealth is going to affect them? If you have like somebody who's like a Sia, not much. Why? Because they've already experienced wealth, right? It's not like, oh, okay, this is really going to affect that person. And usually a person who is wealthy, they're usually making a lot more than $400,000. So for them, it's actually a step down. Okay, so if I've never experienced wealth before and I'm on this trajectory to take that position, is there a higher chance of me being tempted now? Yeah, right, because I've never actually experienced that amount of wealth. And the similar would apply to status. Okay, have I ever had leadership positions before? And these gauges, who are these gauges good for? They're good for me, right? So if I'm moving for those positions or I'm vying for those positions, and I know like, okay, hey, no, I've dealt with, I've had positions where I had money before, or I've had positions where I had status before, and alhamdulillah, I was able to manage them well, and I didn't really feel like they drew me in or they distracted me from the mission. That's a great way of knowing and seeing myself and understanding myself. And I think these are things that even Imam Ghazali, he alludes to it a little bit, in the sense that, all right, well, can we leave positions of leadership empty? No, we can't. Like we just can't do that. Why? Because we create a vacuum, right? And many times in that vacuum, who gets placed? Right? People who are incompetent, people who aren't deserving of those positions. So we need to make sure that there are people who not only are qualified, but they also have the ability to not be unaffected by wealth and status. So how do you determine that in my own life? Is like, okay, well, take smaller positions, right? So if I move from here to here, right, it's not a huge jump, but it becomes very clear on whether power is going to affect me. It becomes very clear on whether wealth is going to affect me. This doesn't mean that a person has, just because a person makes more money, he has a change in wealth, in lifestyle. So for example, if a person goes from $80,000 to $110,000 salary, will he change the way he lives? Maybe, maybe not, right? So maybe if he lived in an apartment before, is there a chance now he'll think about going into a house? Maybe, possibly, right? You know what I mean? Like, so the thing is, but is that a negative? Is that a bad thing? No, right? He's just adjusting according to his lifestyle. So that's not necessarily a bad thing. But on how I'm going to present myself, how I deal with others, right? If all of a sudden I start making more money and I start talking down to people, right? All of a sudden I stop associating with the friends that I had before, right? And these things happen. And if I'm given the opportunity to realize that, the next time I'm given an opening in a leadership position, what should I do? I need to think twice, right? I need to be honest and sincere with myself. Like, you know what? It's probably not good for me. So those who lack those qualities, they should refrain. That's all. But what does that require? It's easy to say, right? Like, okay, hey, if you don't have this quality, if you are tempted by wealth, then you should probably not vie for this position because there's a lot of money in it, right? If, example, there's a treasurer position in a large corporation. Maybe I have the skill set, but I'm not too good with money. And I might start squandering the company's assets. So a person might say, okay, well, he lacks this quality. Why will I still apply and try to go for the position? Because I want to use the money, right? So essentially, what am I lacking? Right, self-introspection, sincerity, right? Because if I was sincere, what would I do? I would have deferred, right? Like I would have refrained and I would have removed myself. And he says here, right, this is the interesting part, those who have tested themselves. And how do you test yourself? Like I said, with these incremental jumps, right? Like getting into positions. And someone might be like, well, maybe I wasn't offered this. Blah, blah. Okay, well, take a trip with your friends and be like, okay, you know what? I'm going to be the Amir on this trip. Right? Let me plan the trip. Let me take care of it. Let me organize it. And all of a sudden, I find myself telling people what to do. I find myself not managing people well. I find everybody's getting angry and upset with me. What did I just prove? Right, that I'm not qualified. That when I'm given a taste of power, that I will abuse it. You know why? Because avoiding leadership is easier than what? Abdicating it. What does that mean? What does he mean here when he says that? He says avoiding leadership is easier than abdicating it.
Like once you're in the hole, you're trapped.
Right. Once I'm in the position, is it easy to step down? No. He's saying it's easier to actually what? To avoid it all. Just don't go into the position. It's easier not to take the position versus taking the position and stepping down. So someone might have the mindset like, oh man, you know what? Every time I've been put in charge of people, I end up being abusive. People end up being really upset. I don't think that people are being managed well, and I start this individual comes out who I don't really like, but this position's opening. Let me try it. Right? Sometimes we have that mindset. Well, let me try it. And the problem is once I realize that this is not working, what do I do then? Right? This is where it becomes a problem. This is where it becomes an issue. So if a lot of these issues revolve around being sincere with ourselves and being honest with ourselves and understanding like, okay, if I am not fit for this, if I'm not fit for this, or I've had a bad experience with myself doing this, or I wasn't able to carry myself in an appropriate, meaningful way, then I probably shouldn't step into it again. And this is why he mentions this here. Okay, just avoid it altogether. Don't try to put yourself into positions of leadership, knowing that you're going to, burn bridges. And the reason he says that is that, right? He's like abdication's like divorce. Right? Because you're physically trying to cut yourself off from something, or you're physically trying to cut yourself off from someone. And the problem is that in marriage, the example that he uses, why is it so difficult to divorce sometimes? Because there's so many things tying you together, right? Like when a couple marries, what happens is like so many things become intertwined, right? Like our lives become so tied together that the moment we start thinking about divorce, what happens is like you start wondering, man, like there are so many things that I'm still tied to this person with. This is going to be so difficult, right? This is going to be so challenging. And the same thing can happen with position, right? Like it's like, man, I become so reliant on this position. I can't do this. What can get me out of that mindset? And let's talk about positions now. Like, so if I take a job and I'm like, oh man, I'm being abusive, blah, 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 what can I do to help me remove like these tendrils that I've created, right? So I've tied myself to this institution, I've tied myself to this corporation, I've tied myself to this job, I've tied myself to this business, whatever it might be. What can I do now so that it becomes easier for me to remove myself? Are we in a room full of stuck people? Huh.
Well, by knowing that, or recognizing that Allah puts you there.
So using these business examples, and what's really interesting is, subhanAllah, I've found this a lot with imams, that they have trouble letting go of their position once they get it. And the reason for that is because we become over-invested in our communities, thinking that, oh, well, if I go, what is the community going to do? Oh, well, who's going to tell the community? Who's going to do this? Right? It becomes this level of responsibility. But at the end of the day, okay, well, who's ultimately responsible for the community? Right? The community is responsible for themselves, right? Like, the community is made up of adults, right? Like, somebody had asked me, they said, Sheikh, you're responsible for the community. I was like, I don't knock on 20,000 doors every day, making sure people are praying and fasting, right? Everybody's responsible for themselves. You can say I'm responsible for educating, right? I'm responsible for holding gatherings. I'm responsible for disseminating knowledge. I'm responsible for setting up programming. Sure, I have no problem, an issue with that. But to say I'm responsible for individuals, that's not fair. Huh? Well, my children, it has nothing to do with my job, right? My children, this is an obligation that Allah placed on me. Like, save yourselves and your family from the hellfire. So I have to look after my children. But when it comes to other adults in the community, is it possible, for example, I'm more worried about your health than you are? Right? Is that, that doesn't make any sense. Or I'm worried more about your spirituality than you are. Like, I know more about your relationship with Allah than you do. Like, there's a level of arrogance that comes in with that mindset. And the problem is when we operate in a space of arrogance and pride, the space we start working in. I like saying that when an individual operates in a space of arrogance and pride, they start working in the land of ideals. Well, it should be like this, it should be like that. And you just keep going back and forth. And what happens is that because the ideals are never met, the person is always ending up frustrated. But if a person is humble, well, where does he start working then? He's no longer working in ideals, he's working where? In reality. And that's what pride does, right? It blinds us. Yes? Personal standards are very different, right? Ideals, when I'm dealing with others, no, this person needs to work at the ideal. Number one, is that what that person's ideal is? Not necessarily, right? People have different standards. We should always strive. I had a really good question one time. It's like, okay, Sheikh, when you keep talking about standards and like qana'ah and being content, how does that actually look? Like if a person is content and a person who is in a state of stagnation, if I happen to catch that person in the moment, does it look any different? Right? It looks the same. Right? If a person is in a state of contentment and a person is in a state of stagnation, if you looked at them like at a bird's eye view, you'd be like, well, this looks the same. The difference is in how they'll move. Because the person who's content, they're always going to want more. Right? But the person who's stagnating, they actually start going down, 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 down. Qana is actually motivating, right? Like being content is actually motivating. Because I'm so happy with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives me, I can't wait for more, right? Like I want more. It doesn't mean I'm not happy with the things that I have. It's like, okay, well, Allah gave me $100 today. I'm going to figure it out. There's a reason Allah gave me $100 today. And if He's giving me $100, this means He knows that I know how to spend it. It means He knows how I'm going to make it last. He knows how I'm going to work with it, fix it. It's like, okay, I got 6 people to take care of. Okay, well, you know what? I need to stretch this out a little bit further. I need to get a little bit more creative. Allah will make a way for me. But does that mean that I'm going to want to keep that 100, like stay at that $100 level? And I'm sure all of us experience this. Like all of us experience some level of poverty or being deprived in some way, shape, or form, right? I'm sure everybody in this room knows what it feels like to be hungry, right? Like what do hunger pangs actually feel like? Like we understand it. When we were in that state, we were like, okay, alhamdulillah, this is what Allah has written for me. Whenever the food comes, it'll come. We figure it out. Does that mean I strive to be hungry again? Right? But I can appreciate it, like I know how it feels, but I will make sure going forward that I don't have to, because I don't want to feel that pain again. Or riding a bike. Like we want to become more and more proficient at riding a bike because we don't want to what? we don't want to fall. Like we don't want to get hurt. We spend a lot. It's amazing actually the amount of time we try to spend avoiding pain, right? Like through our whole lives, we're always trying to avoid pain. And pain, sometimes we think of like physical pain, like cuts and stuff like that. Pain can also be discomfort, right? I mean, I didn't like how that person was looking at me, so I'm going to make sure that I never dressed this way, or I never looked this way, or I never spoke this way, again, because I didn't like that feeling of discomfort. But the amazing thing is, like, it is through that discomfort and pain that actually builds who we are and allows us to become more resilient. So embrace those moments, right? Those things are very important to embrace. And if we want to actually truly free ourselves and untie ourselves from the dunya, we need to rely on Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the only way around it. It's like, well, I have to pay for this, and what's going to happen, right? All of a sudden now, my mind and my nafs is tying itself to the dunya in so many different ways. It's like, oh man, my kids have to go here, and then like I have to pay this mortgage, and then I have to pay off this car, and I got my cell phone bill. So, you know what I mean? Like what's happening now is like I'm starting to tie myself to all these things without realizing, like, well, who got me all of these assets and these things in the first place? It was Allah. And if, whenever, however, He wants to give, He can. In the same way that He can give whenever and however He wants, He can also what? He can also take it away. Ultimately, the choice is, it's not mine, right? It's up to Him. And when we understand that, it actually becomes very, it's very freeing to live life like that. And I'm always amazed by the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. He says that there will be a group of people who enter paradise and their hearts are as light as birds. Right? There's a hadith in Sahih Muslim. And I found this amazing. It's like, because he doesn't have a care in the world, right? Nothing bothers him. Nothing bothers him. He's not upset. He's not jealous. He's not angry. He's just happy, right? He's just a genuinely happy person. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us all happy. But I think understanding, like being honest with ourselves, this is like a very, very important part of the equation that many times we forget. Another important part of this is like having those conversations, having those experiences, learning from our experiences. Because just because somebody is a bad leader once, does that guarantee that they're going to be a bad leader again? No. If a person was bad with money once, does that mean every time going forward they're going to be tested by money? No. Right? So if we're sincere, if we make dua, if we learn to pivot, right? The moment we're like, oh man, I didn't do this too well, let me scale back. Right? Let me scale back, let me try again, let me pivot, let me try to better myself, let me try to improve. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and sometimes we use this verse in one way. I like using this verse when He says, وَمَن يَتَّقِ اللَّهَ يَجْعَل لَهُ مَخْرَجًا, that whoever has taqwa of Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make a way for him. This isn't just in money, right? It can also be in characteristics. If I'm like, man, I'm such a coward, right? And that's tough. Nobody likes looking at themselves and be like, yeah, you're like, this person is such a coward. Nobody likes saying, I actually hate what I see, right? Like when we look in that spiritual mirror and we say like, man, I hate what I see. That is tawfiq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because I have an opportunity to change it. And sometimes it's hard, right? Like it's like, man, I'm not generous, I'm not kind, I'm not this, I'm not that, blah, blah, blah. Okay, thank Allah that you're able to notice and work on them one by one. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can change all of those characteristics. But, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq. Also, tawakkul, right? This is probably the last part that I say is like vitally important. Just remember, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He's the one that provides. Take the means, take the ways, take the pathways that are available to you, and Allah will open up, وَيَرْزُقُكْ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا يَحْتَسِبْ. Right? He will provide for you in ways that you wouldn't even imagine. And that is 100% true. If you understand the difference between the ruling of the strong and the weak, you'll realize that Abu Bakr's prohibition against seeking leadership and then assuming it is not contradictory. When a companion had asked him about seeking position, he said no. He said, don't appoint anyone. And then he himself became the Khalifa himself. Why? Why was it okay? Why is it okay for Abu Bakr? Can't someone argue, be like, hey, why is this okay for Abu Bakr? How come he's advising other people not to, and he himself, not only did he take leadership, he took the highest position of leadership.
Because he didn't seek it.
All right, he didn't seek it. That was a big part of it as well. Not just that, okay, even if he did, was he deserving? Absolutely, 100%. There's so many instances where it was very clear that the Prophet ﷺ was giving Abu Bakr a preference. So many instances. or he gave him preference, or he would show, or he would push him forward, or he would ask Abu Bakr's opinion, right? Or he would take him into a council. People knew. And Abu Bakr, he wasn't blind, right? He saw himself, he recognized himself. And not just that, the fact that he was given preference, or the fact that the Prophet ﷺ would give him that preference, or he would push him to certain things, did that ever change him? And I'm sure he noticed that in himself. Right? Those actions, the fact that he was given that preference, it never truly had an effect on him. If anything, anytime the Prophet ﷺ asked him for something, how much of it would he do? He would go above and beyond. When the Prophet ﷺ said, hey, listen, we need money. The Quraysh are about to come and they're about to invade. We need an emergency fund. We need to start buying supplies. We need to start buying weapons. Bring me whatever you have. And Abu Bakr, what did he give? He gave everything. So, like I said, if the preference did anything, it only pushed him to do more. Radiallahu anhu. So judiciary is something that is definitely less standing than leadership. Leaders, they get a lot more leeway in how they order. They have a lot more leeway in terms of what rules to create and what not to. Judges, they still have positions of authority and leadership, but is of a slightly lesser scale. The thing that they do share is power, right? The thing that they do share is power. Power is fine for those who are strong, but for those who have these worldly desires and pleasures, in the sense that it's going to, here, we all have this, right? We all have worldly desires and pleasures. So when he says worldly desires and pleasures, what does he actually mean? Ahsant, perfect, right? If those worldly desires and pleasures will actually distract you from doing good, will actually cause you to abuse your position, will actually cause you to hurt others, that's where it's a problem and that's where an issue, and that's where it's weakness. Just having those feelings in and of themselves are not weakness, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has placed something very natural in us, right? Like we have a fitri attraction to wealth. We have a fitri attraction to status. Those things are not in and of themselves problematic. But the moment that we allow them to pull us, the moment we allow them to make decisions on our behalf, that is where it becomes a problem and that's where it becomes an issue. So he brings the example here of a judge that somebody brings forward a case, right? So there's a case that the judge is ruling in, and if the judge is truthful, then in this situation, whoever the leader is or whoever appointed that judge, and he sees the judge ruling in this way, he's going to depose the judge. He's like, okay, you're going against my ruling and what I'm saying, I'm going to remove you from your position. Or what is the judge's other option? He can purport falsehood and he can lie. And what will he get? He will get an appeasement. He'll get recognition from the ruler. What should a judge do in this case? Get deposed. Allahu Akbar. Alhamdulillah. Absolutely. And subhanAllah, Ghazali, he actually says, he's like, and the fact that he gets deposed will add to his happiness. Why? Right. Not only did he do the right thing, now he no longer has to what? Not just in the lie, he doesn't have to judge anymore. Right? That responsibility has been removed from his shoulders. Versus appeasement, what happens is that this actually creates like this really bad spiral and feedback, right? It's like, okay, you look for more appeasement, so eventually what happens with your soul is you start, before you're like, okay, well maybe just this one time, and then what happens? 1 turns into 10, 10 turns into 100, 100 turns into 1,000. When it's amazing how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when He talks about Bani Israel, He said they actually sold their deen. This is exactly how that happens. Right? They start selling their deen because they're looking to appease leaders, they're looking to appease the wealthy so that they can get a share of that, actually selling their deen. The difference being spiritually is that this one actually receives reward. And not only will he receive reward, he'll receive the highest reward. And the person who does this, what's going to happen to them? they're going to receive an extreme punishment. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us. So there's a couple narrations that he mentions which I think are really nice. The judges are three kinds. 2 judges are in the hellfire and 1 judge is in paradise. A man who judges without the truth while he knows it, he is in the hellfire. A judge who has no knowledge and violates the right of the people, he is in the hellfire. And a judge who judges with the truth, he is in paradise. So I think the first one and the last one are pretty clear, right? One, he's purposely lying and he's purposely giving a false ruling. And the last one, he purposely is giving a true ruling. This one here, like, if he's ignorant, why is he being held accountable?
Being able to serve its function.
Oh, okay. Huh. Anyone else?
His responsibility to judge with the truth.
Right. He was responsible. Right? Knowledge is, in this situation, it's what? It's not an excuse. It's not an excuse. Why? Because now we're dealing with the rights of others. And if I, as a judge, if I don't know, what do I do? I'm sorry? Step down. Either I can step down from the position, but maybe it's just that case, right? I'm like, man, I really don't know in this case or situation. What is the easy cop out for me to do? Right, I could be like, yo, I can give it to another judge and be like, hey, listen, I really don't know how to rule in this case. Let me refer you to another judge. And even simpler than that, I can say what? I don't know. Right? Like, but saying I don't know requires what? Courage. It requires courage and it requires humility. What do you mean you don't know? You're a judge. You've been studying for the last X number of years. Blah, blah, blah. SubhanAllah. I remember when I was getting hired here, I had like 4 interviews, and the last interview I had, it was like one of the board members, they had like a series of like 100 or 120 fatwas that they asked. Like, so they're asking, and like half of that, I was like, I don't know, dude. Like, I don't know, like, you know, this and that. So I got a phone call from the chair later that evening, and my wife was like, she was like, what happened? I was like, dude, they asked me like all these questions. I was like, I knew a lot of them, but some of them I just had no idea. So the chair called me back and he's like, you know, Jazakallah khair. I was like, for what, dude? I didn't know like a lot of the questions that he was asking. He's like, you said I don't know when you didn't know, and like you composed yourself really well. And so anybody who asked me is like, how'd you get the job at Al-Hijrah? I was like, by saying I don't know. And lastly here, whoever assumes authority has slaughtered without a knife. This hadith is Abu Dawud. What do you guys think about this hadith?
Like working in healthcare, the first thing I think of is, you know, there's situations where you can slip up or not, and then if you are going to be in the lead, you better know what you're doing. Because
Absolutely.
you are going to have people's health or even their
Lives.
lives.
Sure. That 100%. And what is the metaphor here? So, all right, well here, what is the ideal in this situation? If I'm going to slaughter, what should I have? I should have a knife. Meaning that if I'm going to do something, I need to make sure I possess the right tools. Good. Because if I don't have the right tools, what is going to happen to this miskin animal? It's going to suffer. So now, instead of having an animal that didn't suffer, having meat that I was able to eat and to consume and I was able to slaughter, if I choke this animal, can I consume it? No. Haram. If I break its neck, haram, right? And not just that, so not only have I oppressed this and hurt this animal, I've now also made it haram too, to consume. So over here, the Prophet ﷺ, the metaphor he's giving to us is like, listen, if you do anything, make sure that you are equipped to do it. And if you are not equipped, then what? Don't do it. Step away. And subhanAllah, stepping away, it requires so much humility. So what prevents me from being humble? Your nafs, subhanAllah. Right? It's so sad how the nafs is so preventative in allowing us to make not just meaningful decisions for ourselves, but decisions that actually can hurt and affect others. Right? That's the danger behind this. Yeah, may Allah protect us. But it's like even simple decisions. Even simple decisions, someone might be like, oh, well, what is this? I remember I was asked about putting a carpet down in the masjid. And they're like, oh, well, what color do you think is good in the masjid? I was like, I don't pray there. Like, why does my opinion even matter? He's like, so what do you want? I was like, just do a survey. I was like, just ask the musallin who actually paid for the carpet, choose like 2 or 3 colors and let them choose. I said, they're the specialists there because they're going to be the ones that come in every day and they're going to be the ones that are looking down and pray. I was like, if I go pray there like twice a year, why does that make my opinion valid at all? Because I'm the imam? I was like, I can tell you if it's halal or haram color. That's it. Like that's my area of specialty. But I can't go and tell you which one is the best, right? Because this is something that's preferential. So even understanding on how to delegate, right, abdicating power, it's hard. It's really hard. Why is it so hard? So if I have a project, for example, and a lot of us complain about this in different communities. It's like, oh, we're building a masjid, and people are like, well, we're giving all this money, but like we don't know what's going on. Why is it so hard for the administration?
For me personally, is that there are 2 things.
Sure.
Trusting,
Mm.
and I end up doing it anyway. So
Okay. So I want to discuss both of these things. These are very important points. How do I gain trust with the community? Transparency. Thank you. Yes. That's it. That's it. People just need to know what I'm doing. If I give a weekly update, are people going to ask what's going on? No. Because it's like, oh, no, this is the update that we're getting. They're showing us exactly what's going on. How come we don't have transparency then? If that's the easy way to build trust, right? Then how come we don't have that? Oof, avoiding accountability, dang. Yeah, that's scary. Why? A lot of this ties up with the stuff that we've been discussing. So why am I avoiding accountability?
Maybe like reputation.
Okay, no, all of these are tied together for sure. Inherently, do we like being criticized? No. We don't like being criticized. And the more transparent I am, the more I'm opening myself up to criticism. And what is pushing me not to want to be criticized is my nafs. So that's a main reason that we do not want to be transparent, because we don't want to be criticized. But we have to learn to be criticized. Like if I've chosen to take these positions, right? Nobody's forced me to be the project manager. And because I'm choosing to be the project manager, not only do I have to be transparent for myself, but it is the right of the community that I be transparent. Why? Why is it their right? How can I argue that? Or it's not their right? I'm okay. We can argue either way. I'm fine.
Because either they are the donors or the end users.
They're the major stakeholders, whether it be in use or because they paid. And because they're using it or because they paid for it, because some people might, well, it's like, okay, just general use. I think it's very important for every part of a building to be used for multiple reasons. What are some reasons? Like, okay, so here in this masjid, why is it that we use as many rooms as we can? Oh, there's a spiritual use to it, absolutely. And there's a spiritual, social benefit. Sure. What else? If a building isn't used, what happens to that building? It starts deteriorating. Why does it start deteriorating? Because nobody's actually monitoring what's happening. Right? If I have a classroom that is being unused and there's water that's dripping, when is that drip going to get noticed? Right? Allah knows when. But if that classroom's used every day, when is that drip going to get noticed? Immediately. If the musalla is constantly being used, right, and there's a crack, someone is going to come and point it out, right? So this is why use is so important, right? Why do things decay and why do they go back? Because there's nobody to monitor it. And not just that, like it's a building, right? So things are going to fall apart. It's amazing how buildings and homes, these are the only assets that increase in value with their increase of use, right? Like a car, like the more I use a car, what happens to the value of the car? Like it just, right? It just drops. A house, like the moment I move in, am I going to leave it in better condition? No, right? Like there's physical use. I'm putting weight on the floors. I'm using the pipes. I'm doing all these things, right? Those things are going to break down. So, but having that use is something that's important. So we said transparency is something that's fundamental. We also said this idea of trust in the community. I like using the example of taking out the trash. So sometimes we complain like, oh, we don't have enough volunteers. Somebody comes and they volunteer and they say, okay, hey, listen, I'll take out the trash. I'll be like, thank you, please. There's the trash can. So they go and they take out the trash, and I'm like, no, not like that. Go from this door. And they're like, okay. So they go from this door. It's like, no, and then turn right. It's like, okay. Okay, no, I need you to spin 3 times. Okay, yeah, no, hold it with your left hand, not with your right hand. What's going to happen eventually? They're going to get frustrated. And what usually happens? What's the next step after the frustration? They're not going to come back. Why was I dictating? All right, it's always ego. Why? Because the way I do it is the best way. And anybody else who does it needs to do it my way. But if I want organic engagement, I definitely have to give guidelines, right? We can't just let people do whatever they want. And if we have rules and regulations within an institutional boundary or within a local, state, federal, whatever, I need to follow those. But within that space, what should I do? Take a step back. Because, okay, it might take him a little longer. Okay, maybe he didn't tie the bag I tie it, the way I tie it. Maybe he took a different route. Maybe he chose a different color. Did it get done? Was it done safely? Was it done effectively? That's what we should be worrying about. Not, did he do it like me? لا إله إلا الله.
There's that saying, I don't know if it's a proverb or what's the source of it. من اجتهد وأصاب فله.
Is it hadith?
It's hadith.
Yeah.
So then what are the constraints of that?
Uh-huh.
You know, when you compare this to the middle, the second
Yes.
case, the judge who has no
Mhm.
knowledge and violence. Well, he can do ijtihad, right? He can,
Sure.
you know, and not be right.
But
So
I'm saying, because what did he do? He violated people's rights with his jihad. And it's very different to do ijtihad and come to a conclusion, because you're not taking anybody's rights in that situation. But and not just that, you're operating in a space of ilm. Right? So for example, if a mechanic thinks that the alternator is no good, He's a mechanic, right? This is his experience. He's like, okay, I've looked at everything. I checked all the wires. I think the alternator is no good. And it turns out that one of the wires is bad. The alternator is actually fine. There's not going to be any punishment upon him. Okay, versus me. I'm not a mechanic. And I come in and I'm like, you know what? You need to change the alternator on this. Maybe I'm not going to tighten the wires properly, right? Like I can actually hurt someone with that versus somebody who's qualified and somebody who has a skill set. That's what the difference is. That's all. Because this, in the situation you're talking about, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, إِذَا اجْتَهَدَ مُجْتَهِدْ خلاص يعني وصل رتبة الاجتهاد. Right? He's actually worthy of doing ijtihad. Over here, the Prophet ﷺ says very clearly, the jahil. Right? This person actually doesn't know. Meaning that he got this position and he's undeserving of it. And there's a very, or you know what, I think maybe this might be a good question to close on. You know, all of you are familiar with imposter syndrome, right? Where a person feels they're not fit for a position versus somebody who is actually unfit. What is the difference between these two people? Well, I mean, it's possible that the ignorant person is completely confident, right? So sometimes overconfident. What else? What are some other differences? Will the ignorant person doubt themselves? No. And the person who has a skill set, they actually will. Why? Because doubt is a sign of what? Not just nobility, something else. Sure. What do we call that? I'm sorry? We would say, in general, this is definitely called the aql. But what does that say about my heart? I am? Oh, sure. I'm humble or sincere. Because will an insincere person ever doubt their intention? No.
What was the first thing you said?
I think humility was the first one. Yeah, being humble. And I said sincerity. Because only the sincere person is going to what? Question and ask. The one who's not, they don't care, right? Whether a person gets hurt, whether they don't get hurt, because they only care about who? Themselves. And they don't care about the repercussions. They don't care what's going to happen. Versus a person who is sincere, not only are they worried about others, but they're also worried about themselves. They're worried about their own accountability. They're worried about, will this deed be accepted, right? These are all definite signs of sincerity. So if a person ever does suffer imposter syndrome, then that's fine. Take that as a badge of honor. Take that as a sign of sincerity. And if there are certain skills that you wish you had, or skills that you need, or skills that you want, okay, go pursue them. There's nothing wrong with that. That is a sign of humility, to know when we don't know. But may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us tawfiq. The next section, inshallah, that we'll be spending time and that we'll be discussing is preaching. And this is basically preaching, teaching. He kind of equates the two. But again, this is something that also has to do with that power dynamic we were talking about. Anything that we're going to discuss in these next few sections, it has to do with that power dynamic, right? Where you have somebody who is in a position of authority and a person who has to obey that position. Over here, it's broader. Over here, it's more narrow, and over here, it's even more narrow. So you have a lot of the similar rules applied to each of these levels and each of these situations. But bi'idhnillahi ta'ala, we'll definitely discuss this and get into this discussion next week. Wallahu a'lam wa sallallahu ala khayri khalqin. Nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi sahbihi wa sallam. Inshallah, Salat Aisha is in about 10 minutes. Any questions before we end today? No? All right. Jazakumullah khair. No problem. Oh, could you guys just help put the chairs away?